Arshia Afsar, co-founder and director of Learn2Lead and founder-director of two of India's school brands. Learn2Lead and Education World welcomes you to this webinar, Essentials of Leadership in Crisis. Learn2Lead is a research-based company that creates and designs age-appropriate curriculums and undertakes educational mentoring, consulting, and training. It believes in providing schools with solutions in the form of services and programs. Education World is India's highly respected, read, and most comprehensive education magazine. It's also the portal for educators, parents, and students with the latest education news, institution profiling, and most trusted institutional rankings, right now considered to be the most authentic in India. Today's webinar will be moderated by Ms. Kausar Saeed, founder director of Learn2Lead. I welcome Kausar.
Thank you, Arshia.
Kausar has been a leader in her own right. Owning one of the top primary schools of Hyderabad, she has been instrumental in mentoring and guiding several schools and leaders with her unique leadership programs. As I welcome Kausar, my partner, my best friend, a national and international award winner, I would love for all of you to welcome her just like I am doing right now. I continue by welcoming the rest of our panel here. Mr. G.S. Madhav Rao, Advisor, Kothari Group of Schools, Basal Education Society, and I-League Education. Welcome, sir. Madhav Rao, sir, we welcome you on board. I would next like to welcome Mr. Francis Joseph, co-founder SLN Global Network. I'm sure all of you have heard of it and what all it's doing in the education community now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Ashok Pandey, Director, Alcon Group of Schools. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Arshia.
Vernon Mason, Junior Director, Leadership Solutions, and previously President of We School. Welcome, Mason. Saad Said, Executive Director of Legacy School, Bangalore. Welcome, Saad.
Thank you so much, Arshia.
It was an absolute honor to introduce the most celebrated educational leaders in India and outside today, who are here to enlighten us with their words of wisdom and experience. I now hand over the mantle to Kausar, who will take this awesome ride of learning further. Over to you, Kausar.
Thank you, Arshia.
Bhavin is here, Kausar. You can start off introducing him. I have left the honors to you since you were very particular.
So Arshia has introduced everyone except the captain of the ship. That is Bhavin Shah, the CEO of Education World. Welcome, Bhavin.
Thank you, Kausar, and
Yes.
all the best to all the panelists. I'm going to have a guest appearance
Not able
today.
to hear.
Sir, we are able to hear you now.
Oh, you're all.
Yes, we are able to hear you.
Welcome.
Welcome. Okay, Kausar, you can go ahead.
Today is different from yesterday. So will be another day for leaders in school, not because of now the crisis time, but such uninvited and unexpected incidents have been
Not
happening
able to hear.
all the time. This unpredictability of crisis is strengthening of some dimensions which are essential to effective leadership. And that's what is this attempt of ours, that through this webinar, we get some insights from accomplished leaders who have seen several facets of leadership through their decades of experience in schools across the world. Yet one string that connects all of them is how well they have handled crisis and turned it into an opportunity to learn and lead. So let's hear it from them and scaffold the essentials of leadership in crisis. We have our first speaker today, Mr. Madhav Rao. Sir,
Kausar, he's facing some problem. You can just go ahead with the other speaker. And
Not able to hear.
Yeah, maybe someone should talk to him.
Yeah.
okay.
So you go ahead with the other round, and in the meanwhile, I'll tell Poonam to help Mr. Rao.
Okay. So we will move on to the second speaker of ours, who is Mr. Francis. Mr. Francis, I don't call him an educational leader, but for me, he's been a reformer. Francis, your leadership has always been about bridging gaps, connecting people, schools, and creating platforms to share best practices. And you have always taken the road and the road not taken. I'm sure handling crisis has been a way forward for you. So how do you perceive crisis in context to schools and leaders? And what do you think is the key of leadership in crisis? What is the key for characteristics for a leader to handle crisis?
Thank you, Kausar, and thank you for accommodating me in this among all these stalwarts. I'm not sure how much crisis we all were involved, but there are different types of crises. But before I share, I want to wish all of you happy Thursday. We are all getting excited to celebrate our profession tomorrow. And simple as that tomorrow there would be people saying that teachers are struggling. That's one perspective. But there would be also people who are celebrating. Similarly, crises also have multiple, eyes to look at, right? If as a leader, if I come to my desk and I might not find my pen lying right next to me, and I can actually create a crisis kind of scenario. So I think it depends on to see from the level of crisis you are in. It is very, very crucial. You can always think you're always in a crisis because that's your mind frame, right? You have to set your mind frame correctly, seeing that there is no crisis. I mean, I have thankfully, because I was involved in a large guru through my first part of my career, I was exposed to a lot of crisis scenarios. Something very bad, even not worth commenting, especially due to work. But I think at one point of time, you always realize that crisis is a big way to learn, right? I mean, I've never seen crisis as a problem. I've seen it as an opportunity always, and I've actually learned few things which I always do when I feel that I'm in a crisis. One is very, very clear. I listen to everyone, and that's a habit beyond crisis. Also, I've learned, right? Every single voice you have to hear, because no matter how small, how big, you might have people who might not understand your perspectives, but to listen to people who do not match with your perspectives, right? It's important to listen, however small, however big. Could be a peon in your school, could be a clerk in your school, could be your CEO, could be anyone. But listening is very, very crucial. And I think weighing it as per the crisis, and always go out of the rim to watch how the crisis look at, right? So that gives you a total view. I just don't jump into things trying to solve everything, because there is nothing to be solved in a crisis. You have to just bring solutions, and solutions usually are not brought. In my view, I have never brought a solution on my own, right? There's been a contribution from people who have actually brought in ideas, and we have actually developed to bring it out. So I think remaining calm is also very important. You have to be really calm. And I'm very blessed that I find myself very calm when I find a scenario. I have a friend in Delhi, and I remember once in a school, there were so many people who created a commotion in the school, and they all rushed to him, right? And they were just screaming, at their top of their voice and saying, "Come on, this should happen, that should happen," all those stuff. And this guy was like just quiet. He's a dear friend in Delhi, and the parents, they were just wondering, why is this guy so quiet? And after like 10 minutes, all of them calmed down. They said, "Arey, come on, we are screaming. You're just not saying anything." So he said, "You are saying, I'm just listening to you." So I'm saying sometimes remaining calm and listening and just not reacting or overreacting is very, very critical. That's my first take, because I'll leave it for the other panelists to share.
I get that, Francis. So you say that the way you will think about the crisis itself, I mean, the mindset is very important. The right attitude is very important, and being calm and not being reactive, but giving responsible reaction is more important.
And not impulsive.
Not impulsive.
Impulsive is a very, easily you can get involved. Your emotions are so high, easily you can just jump into anything. you have to be very careful on not being impulsive.
So basically you say that the right mindset is most important when you're processing a crisis, and also to think forward or to create a process to come out of that crisis. So can we now have our first speaker, Mr. Madhav Rao? Sir, can you hear us now?
Yeah, I can.
So Mr. Rao has been an educational leader for over 4 decades. He has worked with schools in the remotest of areas in India to that of one of the biggest brands in the world. I'm sure, sir, in this long journey of yours, you must have faced many challenges as a leader. So how do you perceive a crisis, and can you share some essential elements for leadership in crisis?
Thank you. Thank you, Kausa. I'm humbled in that sense. Thank you for inviting me to join this, the panel of eminent thinkers and educationists. I see some of those faces very familiar and friendly to me there on the screen. Schools are essentially about human beings. The human beings who come, they come with a lot of attitudes, a lot of behaviors, a lot of beliefs, a lot of aspirations. It's always, school is a dynamic system. It's never static. Leaders would know that 2 days are not same in a school scenario. It changes almost everything. Many times I wonder whether this word crisis, challenge, and new norm are actually new to schools. I think crisis is normal to schools in many ways. We don't have an environment where, like, doctors at least have a CT scanner to know something about, but we don't have any one of them. So when the crisis comes, it actually hits us in some way or other, basically. You all have been leaders and you're dealing with these scenarios. And many times you're finding solutions. See, one of the problems of management is about ad hoc decisions. When you decide on ad hoc basis, cumulatively, they will generate more problems to solve. That's how it happens. So for me, an essential of the leadership, one of the dimensions is problem solving and decision making. These are the 2 most important elements. Great leaders are always known for their decision making, for their actions, less for their speeches, if you see that way. Right. When you have to take a decision, there's so many things that you need to basically consider these dimensions. That you're all more lucky than my times. You have a problem, you have a ready reckoner, you have a book, you have a internet, you have a solution everywhere. I hope these solutions are working in your context, because there is no one solution for any school, because no board fits in everybody. No, that's what it happens. So I learned the hard way. When I was at Fujairah, I sent a group of students to Alain for an overnight camp. And I saw them off. They were very joyous. And the teacher was very enthusiastic. And they very safely reached Alain. After that, in the evening, when I was at home, before my dinner, I had a call. The call was all bad news, that there was an accident. Some students received burns on their faces at the campfire. I was for a moment silent, and I asked for the names of the students, and I also asked for their telephone numbers. Right. Now my mind started working after that. The mind says, don't go to Alain. You will be arrested. It's a risk. In those countries, whenever anything happens of this nature, the leader is arrested first, basically, right? And then says, you have to communicate to parents. How do you communicate in crisis? that there's always the way of doing it, push the junior to the front and then you stay back. But it has to be responsible communication. So my mind says that you need to communicate to the parents. Then I have to see these parents or move to Elaine, they go there and then they meet their children and maybe they have to stay overnight. I need a lot of money. There is the legal, there is the police and the media. The media is always, something we are wary of in crisis. But I decided to go. And I myself picked up the phone and started talking to the parents. Some were annoyed, some were unhappy, some were very sad. But I could tell them, look here, I had no idea what is the seriousness of the burns. Absolutely, I had no idea because the communication is yet to come. What happened by that time is students were moved to the hospital and my teacher was arrested. So there always is a communication kind of scenarios. So I took them along with me, went to the hospital and then met the doctors and the police, whatever could be done. And then I realized that, but fortunately, we didn't have that kind of a serious problem except in case. And what exactly happened? When they were lighting the fire, when they were adding the fuel, a whip of wind carried the flame towards the side where the children were standing. And it's so unfortunate of a thing to happen at that moment, that whip to come, right? Then we're lucky, next day we handled it and then we all came back, admitted them into local hospitals. But I realized I failed as a leader. I failed as a leader because I didn't actually think this event is going to be that kind of an event, right? It's one of those routines, I thought. The briefing was there. A simple briefing is, at the campfire is, put a rope around it for some distance, don't allow children to come nearby. Even that wasn't there. So I learned two lessons from this. One is I need to proactively think, proactively create a process and procedures and systems, right? And then I realized that I need to have another habit in the school system. I need to be observant. I need to be, all the time getting the information that is needed. I need to watch the patterns that are happening in school to identify any crisis is in the making, that kind of a thing. So what I realized is ultimately is entire school is our system is like one cell. What we do is system thinking of a bigger issue, how to look at it. In the process of a system is like a cell, it's like a structure. Within the structure, there are so many components and these components are interdependent and interconnected. They help each other in working and they contribute towards the big picture. That is the life of a cell that you see. But when the system gets disturbed, one of the elements is disturbed, then you have a crisis on hand. That's why you need to have a system thinking of issues. For example, if you have a disruption, particular students are disrupting. If you do the big picture, Van Loon says, you go higher up and then you see more. And I like this. You have to see the big picture and then find where is the root cause. Most of us fail to identify the root cause in crisis of this kind. Once you identify the root cause, then you can have a problem-solving process and then you have a decision making. I have only two things. I think I don't know how many minutes I've got. 1 more minute or 2 more minutes. Right. Okay. So there are two things about problem solving is you need to be creative. You have to gather new ideas. You have to address opportunities and threats whenever something happens. That's how you solve a crisis. You actually transform schools in many ways, when you do that. And one of the problems is when decision cannot we take a decision, you have a solution, you just can't go there. You have to have analysis of that. You have to have a SWOT analysis of that. You have to look at the opportunity and threat and address a solution that would actually take care of your opportunities and the threats, that kind of. So it has to be a kind of creative. One of the problems is when a decision is made, it takes a little more time. People take more time to implement. The value of the decision is lost. And by the time things change at the ground, the time lapse between the decision and then implementation has to be as short as possible. And it depends on issue, how serious it is. But that's more important. For me, what I've learned, these 5 basic things include. You have to be vigilant, you have to have a process, you have to find a solution, you have to be creative in your solutions, and then decision making must be firm and quick, and then implementation must be fast.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you for that story, sir. I'm sure that's one of the experiences that that made you learn how to handle crisis, and some of the elements that we derive from that is being farsighted. As leaders, we need to be farsighted. We don't need to wait for a crisis to happen and give a knee-jerk reaction, but create a system and create procedures in place and have a problem-solving mindset, as in the skill of problem solving. And I also like the importance of doing the right thing at the right time. Yes, that's very important. Sometimes we think too much about the problem within ourselves and we do not act. So acting at that point and taking the lead as a leader is also very important. Thank you for bringing those elements on the panel for today. So now we go to our third speaker, who is Mr. Ashok Pandey, sir. Mr. Ashok Pandey, you have been a leader for over 3 decades, have worked with schools across India and world. And one of these elements which I have always observed about sir is he brings in a pinch of humor to everything that he represents. And probably that's something that crisis needs. Being calm, being able to think rightly, and at the same time, losing it out. The environment becomes so stressful that we need to get clogged at that time. So it's very important for the leader not to be calm, but also to strike that right balance of humor so that all of them are working towards problem solving skill together. So sir, I've also read your article on LinkedIn about your PRMM model, that is preventive risk mitigation model, where you emphasized about importance of being prepared for crisis and also the importance of resilience. So how did you derive on this model, sir? Though I know that you wrote it after COVID, in spite, I would want to know the experience that you made you write this, draft this model.
Thank you, Kausar. And I am grateful to my friend Francis and Mr. Madhav. I listened to both of them. And what they have said, I will try and build on that. Because the fundamentals of any crisis management are exactly what they have already said. But let me tell you 2 or 3 things before I come to the main topic. Have you heard of any war hero who became a war hero and there was no war? I think the answer is no. Have you heard of any, statesman or a stateswoman and there was no public crisis which brought him or her up? No, it never happens. You see, so what both people have said, this is an opportunity to see that silver line and make yourself be counted forever. That is what crisis is all about. And that is what leadership is all about. Now, you refer to my article and the present scenario. Let me tell you, there are 3 phases to the entire thing. When COVID started, 2 months down the line, even now also, and then let us say next 3, 4, 5 months of scenario. And just for the sake of clarity, nomenclature I'm giving to that. The first phase was survival phase. The second phase was reconstruction phase. And third, now we have come to a phase, COVID or no COVID, schools opening, not opening, hybrid model, in person, virtual. Now we have to lead by example. And that is the third phase. And that is what the leaders have to do. Survival is over. Our crisis management is over. Now we know what are the nuts and bolts of virtual education. We know what our resources, we know our constraints. And I think as we excelled on campus as leaders, we have to excel now as leaders without a campus. I know it is very difficult for any principal or head of institution when you do not have your campus, we do not have people around to flex your influence and authority. You become for a while fish without water, right? But then you have to recover yourself. So what are those recovery phases? That is something very, very important. So let me give you an illustration here. There are three aspects of our living together during this particular time. One is our health condition. The second is our livelihood. And third is education. And you know, in the last 6 months, if you give grading, the response in the education sector gets A grade. Response in health probably gets B grade. Response in livelihood is struggling at C, because that is where the most of the problem lies, which means the educational response of the teachers to reach out to the children with their cognitive, with their ACL, with well-being, emotional support has been exemplary. And this has not come without the role that the leaders played there. So what did the leaders do there? They did 3 or 4 things very quickly, almost as an instinct. First, a moral support to their team, appreciating them, adaptability, embracing change, fast decision making, removing the bottlenecks and red tapeism. We did it, and you see the result. Now, once we have done this, now we have to reboot ourselves. The second phase of reconstruction is rebooting. So what do you reboot? The system, computer system rebooting means that your interface with the hardware and the benefit that you provide in terms of output, it is the operating system that does it. Leadership is an operating system. So you know your hardware, you know your resources, and you know what deliveries you are obligated to do. And that is where this rebooting means that you start preventing what has bothered you in the past and what might bother you in future. And that is where I say that you plan things. Mr. Madhura said that. Plan it. And what is the planning? First of all, you bring a protocol of online teaching. Bring a protocol of in-person teaching and what will happen when the two mix together. So do you have a resource team? Do you have an operations team? Do you have a team which will communicate? Communication is very important, both of them have said. And do you have a think tank which is giving you the research and development inputs as to what our requirements are? If you start working in this, and then Francis mentioned that you have to talk. Communication is very important. And I say one of the first preventive measures is, Kausar, flatten the wall. So there should be no boundaries. Reach out to everybody, pick up the phone and talk to a child, to any employee, to the teacher. That flattening of the wall is very important. Second is check in with people. How are they? What are they doing? What are their personal problems? How they are coping up with the whole thing? Have you put a lot of expectations on them, or you have lowered down the expectations? So case loading of expectations must be reduced. You see, the third is, Francis suggested, don't be impulsive. I will agree to that, but add your only impulse should be curious about people's welfare. Find out what they are doing. You see, what support you can provide them, how you can empower them. Can you unleash their potential? Be impulsive about that. So some of these rebootings you can do to find out what is happening around. So this is the second prevention. And the last thing for this segment, let me tell you, is that as a leader, it comes from the army. As a leader, you must have your map. And the map is, you want to know where to reach where. Navigation is very important. But the saying is, you must trust the terrain, which means you check with the people, take their feedback, what is happening, what is going wrong, what suggestions they have. So have your map, but trust the terrain and flatten the walls so that people come together in a team, collaborate, they are honored, they are valued, they do work in a team. I think any crisis will be surmounted without any problem.
I'm sure the team coming together and with the same vision as you said, the leader needs to think, he needs to, as Sir said, you need to take an aerial view, you need to be a thinker, you need to create a map and then bring the team on the same platform. And that's
Absolutely.
together that we will work. And certainly the mindset of the leader, as Francis said, needs to be needs to be on the right track to solve the crisis in the right time. Talking about importance of team and bringing all the stakeholders together, we will have one of our speakers speaking about that, because that's a very important element when we deal with crisis. We cannot deal with crisis in our own, sitting in our offices. You need to go out there, because it is for people that we need to solve that. So yes, building up a team is really important here. So with this, we come to our fourth speaker. Just when I was thinking, Mason, that leadership is going to be a bumpy ride, here we have you sharing all your positive stories. Vernon Mason started his work with $5,000 in his credit card with his mother, with a school, with a child care center, which could cater to 30 children. But then it grew to 150 later, and then it was destroyed by a natural disaster in 1999. And again from there, he rose like a phoenix from the ashes, and he grew up. And he grew the school, the V School, to 5 centers, and also started a director's leadership solution out of his desire to make directors' path to success easier. I see Vernon Mason as a crisis manager himself, and here he is with us to share his story of perseverance during these tough times. Welcome, Mason.
Good morning. I'm happy and honored to be here with you. I'm on the East Coast of the United States this morning, so it's early here for me, but I'm happy and honored to be here with you. And you're right. You know, I do believe that one of the reasons I've been successful in early childhood is because of my handling of crisis. And I'm a very practical person. I don't talk a lot about theory. I jump right into the practicality. And the first thing I have to say is, in our early childhood and educational world, leaders tend to survive in a crisis mode and tend to work under being stressed out and in overwhelm. And I would say that one of the best things of handling a crisis is to find a way to not live in a world of being stressed out and overwhelmed, because there's a time for being stressed out and overwhelmed, and that is during a crisis. And if we live in such a mindset, when a crisis comes, we can't stand up, we can't handle, we just crumble. And it's okay if you do crumble a little bit, but as a leader, you have to stand up and move forward on that. So protecting yourself during normal time. When you are working, then work and work hard. But when you are off, being off. And providing the same respect for those who support you. When they have a day off, when they are on vacation, not contacting them, not asking questions, not sending them texts, not sending them messages, and getting feedback from them. Because it's really important that our minds are able to rest and not think about work 24 hours, seven days a week. The other thing I would say as a leader, what I find is very, very important is to stay informed and to surround yourself and to stay educated about how other industries, how other providers are also weathering storms, so that when you do make decisions, you can support your decision. You can say, this is why we made this decision. And I believe what I call is participatory management. And that is having a leadership team, meaning either it being an assistant or a group of lead teachers or school personnel who you talk to and run ideas by and get influence and input back from them. The other thing I think is very, very important, and many schools, especially privately owned schools, don't do a really great job at, and that is making sure they take care of the healthy financial status of their school. They run on a shoestring budget, and then when something goes wrong, the world falls apart because there is no reserves. And so I would say right now, as we came into COVID, many schools had no reserves. And I would say right now, we must, as we build back, we must commit to putting a percentage of our revenue into an account for a rainy day, because the rainy day will come. The other thing is having proper insurance. I'm from the United States. We are we have lots of insurance here for lots of things. Making sure that you have the proper coverage is important. And then I would say having a clear communication in the event, as the gentleman told the story about the campfire, having the right communication team in place. Who is going to communicate with the media? What is the message? To control the message as much as possible. I know that sounds kind of manipulative, but it is very, very important that you put out the true story out there and that you put the story out as best in a manner that people can receive it, that is true, but in a positive spin. That maybe that's what I'm saying is. And the last thing I would say is, when you are going through a crisis, to learn from it, to figure out how we got here, what led us to this situation, what can we learn from this crisis? Because I do believe this is not across the board, but I do believe many times something good arises from it after the times. You mentioned the flood that we were in 1999. I can tell you that I do believe that I am more successful having endured and lived through that flood. I came back from that. It reset my focus. It made me look at things in a different way. And and that was not the only crisis. Anyone who's led schools or a series of schools knows that it's kind of the world that we live in. It is, trying to go from survive one issue and being prepared for the next issue. So also thinking about when you are in the middle of a crisis, that is when your character is built. People pay attention to the decisions you make and to the actions you make and to the steps that you follow. People often forget how you handle things and when times are good, but how you handle things when times are bad is really what builds your character and builds your reputation. And the last thing, the last thing I will say is working with teachers to make sure that we do handle the teachers with empathy and grace, and knowing, especially now and many other times, that children's behaviors will often exemplify and become larger, more challenging than they are in normal times. We often forget that the children we are caring for, the children that we are trying to educate, are also living in a stressful crisis situation. Their parents are also, and so being compassionate and dealing with grace with our teachers to understand them and being patient with them. And the last thing I will say is that, we want to think that once the COVID is over and once the situation is over, that it'll be full steam ahead and full wind in our sails and there will be no more issues. And that really is just not reality. And it hasn't been my reality in the 28 and a half years that I ran schools. It wasn't my reality. The real line here is, it's not if we have a crisis, it's when we have a crisis. And preparing and taking care of ourselves and trying to not being overwhelmed and stressed out on the normal days, so that when a crisis does arise, you can make educated and proper decisions.
Thank you for sharing that information with us, Mason. What I understand from your point of view is you have stressed upon the importance of taking care of yourself during crisis. And you have also very importantly underlined the importance of financial planning, and not just being prepared from the perspective of creating a plan for your school, but also the financial plan. I mean, creating a fund system which is there so that it helps during the crisis. Yes, that's something that is lacking with many of the organizations that we see. We are, it's nice to be positive, but it's also nice to be self-reflective and real. So being real and being truthful and facing it and planning it with that honesty is certainly very important in leadership, because leaders cannot, they are the face for everything. They can just turn a situation around into an opportunity. That's how I see. Now in these crises, we have been hearing about so many schools and so many leaders, but then I've always seen a clear distinction between two kinds of people. There are certain kind of people who are just discussing about the problems, and I've seen a certain set of people who are working ahead. I couldn't even see, are they in the same world? So that's the mindset that we as leaders need to develop. And thank you for sharing your expert advice on this. So with this, we come to our fifth speaker.
Can I add one more? Can I add one more little quick thing?
Yes, yes.
Okay, because we work with children, we work with teachers, many times we struggle with who to prioritize. And we say, we can do anything because it's for the children. But in the time of crisis, we have to also maintain that we have to be here when the crisis is over. So we can put all our resources and all our financial and just use it all up trying to do what's best for the children, but yet then there's no organization to be here at the end. So I would say finding a very healthy balance of doing what's right for the children, what's right for the teachers, and what's right for the organization is important. Thank you.
That's right. So financial planning does forms the crux of the way you will survive after a crisis, is what you were trying to emphasize. And yes, it's rightly important. With this, we come to our fifth speaker, Saad Seth. He's joined the Legacy School as a director and was personally vested with the responsibility of ensuring the transition of the school from its earlier known avatar, Vidya Niketan Academy, to the Legacy School campus. And you did this seamlessly, Saad. And you have actively engaged all the stakeholders of your school community to achieve the school's vision collectively. You believe, I've read this, that you believe that at the heart of a great high-functioning school are passionate and skilled people who come together every day to champion children and their learning. So building it upon that, and by now we have understood how important it is to bring all stakeholders together when we look at crisis management in context to schools. So can we have you share your ideas on how to bring all stakeholders together during crisis?
Sure. Thank you so much, Kausar. Thank you for the introduction and for leading our panel discussion this evening. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Bhavin and the education world for organizing a webinar on a topic. I've heard so many topics that have been redundant, and I'm glad to hear a topic that's coming about that is really relevant for all of us as leaders across industries, but especially in the field of education. I'm also grateful for the opportunity to share my learnings from my mistakes, my failures that have led to the successes that we've had. And I've walked, I would say, from what I heard of Mason, my journey seems very similar in picking up after my mother's footsteps and having gone through the challenges we've endured. I will agree with what Mason said, that it's those mistakes and failures that lead to the successes that we have as educators today, and are stronger and more resilient and better for those mistakes and challenges we've gone through. I think given the current conversation, I'll keep the focus around COVID for right now and take that as the crisis we've had. I think COVID right now has confronted us with one of the most difficult crisis leadership challenges of our time thus far, and has compelled all of us as leaders to adapt, and to adapt overnight for many of us. So what, as leaders, what can we do to rally the community and bring them closer together during a crisis when we ourselves find ourselves in crisis and unsure of the path ahead? I think the typical understanding of the role of a school leader is to plan or to guide and implement a strategy to ensure that the entire school ecosystem is well balanced, for it to remain in alignment with the vision. And as Mason pointed out, you have to keep in mind the focus of the organization, your stakeholders, as well as the outcome and what you are promising in terms of what you want to deliver. And it's the leader's role to bring all of these stakeholders, systems, and processes together in an organized manner to ensure that the organization continues to advance further towards achieving its mission. For most of us as leaders, we typically think that the idea of leadership, or the idea that we've known of leadership, comes with a fair degree of predictability and control. We've been used to being on campus, we have a calendar, we know what's happening. There's a fair sense of predictability and control. At a time like this, I think all of us as leaders are feeling a sense of pressure due to the lack of predictability and also the lack of control to a great extent. And this is something because COVID has placed a crisis upon us that is beyond our regular domain of practice or our regular domain of influence. And I think that is something that is making a lot of school leaders uncomfortable. And like Mr. Pandey pointed out, it was something that we experienced in March, but I think at this point, a lot of us have gotten a hold on what virtual learning should be like and should look like, and how we can make it effective for our children going forward. COVID does not seem to be going away anytime soon, so we have to think ahead in terms of how can we work towards supporting our community and supporting their needs. And if there's anything we've learned in the last 6 months with COVID and given the pandemic, is that this is a real crisis that could threaten your community's very existence. And it requires leaders within the organization to be open. It requires us to be open to experimentation. It requires us to be resilient. Like Joseph mentioned, you have to be calm, you have to be adaptive. And I think the mantra right now, a lot of us are talking about, is the ability to be agile. I think the attitudes and abilities are rooted intrinsically within the cultural DNA of an organization. And I think COVID is a great time for us to relook at the school culture, and every organization has its existing culture. So to go back and look at that culture and see what aspects of it are working right now and what aspects of it do we want to change. I think for us, we know all schools, educational institutions are learning communities, they're social organizations. Learning is a social process for us. So when we bring these learning communities together, there are a shared set of values and beliefs that eventually shape the culture, attract people to the school, and also drive the practices within the organization. It's these beliefs that in turn influence the behavior and determine the way in which the community responds during the crisis, be it your teachers, be it your staff, be it the children, be it the parents. And I think as a leader, the way we model and the way in which we communicate, the way in which we carry and conduct ourselves has a strong influence in the way people perceive us. We have someone right now, Mason, you'll have to forgive me for taking this reference, but we have someone right now in North America that's leading the country. And there is a certain perception that comes across in the way a person leads. And irrespective of how great the strategy is, if they don't see credibility in the leader, they're not going to believe any aspect of the strategy coming through. I think it's important also for us as leaders to assess the scale and the severity of the impact and to keep repeatedly going back to keep a pulse on this. The one thing we have to understand is when we're faced with a situation that impacts our entire community, we have to understand that we can't do everything ourselves. So the aspect of a distributed leadership model is so critical, and the top-down leadership model does not work in a situation like this. We have to be able to rely on members within our team that we trust and to whom we can delegate and share the responsibility of managing the crisis And it's not necessarily the leader's burden to handle everything, but it is our responsibility to be able to lead how we handle the situation. And in an emergency or crisis, I think it's everyone's problem, and everyone feels that it's urgent, it's unpredictable, it's beyond everyone's control, possibly even volatile. And I'll draw the analogy of the firemen right now in the front line fighting the blazing wildfires that we're seeing in the US. It feels almost like that at some point. I think it's our role as leaders to evaluate and manage that risk, and to determine as to how the crisis is going to impact the sustainability of our community, the stakeholders, the organization, and our services. And I'll go back to reiterating Mason's point. As a school, we went through the same journey when we had a setback much earlier. We did not have reserves, and that set us back significantly. And today, we've learned from that example, and we definitely set aside reserves today. And therefore, we're in a better situation to be able to handle the crisis that we find ourselves in today. So in the context of this, I would like to share 5 things that we can do as school leaders to bring the community together during the crisis. I think the first aspect of it is to have everyone continue to feel a common sense of purpose, and to reiterate the school's philosophy, the school's values, and why you've even come together as a community in the first place. So I think even during a crisis, it's imperative that all of our decisions, all of our actions that should remain in alignment with the school's vision and mission, and also remain in the best interest of the students, their learning and development, their well-being, and that of our overall community, including our teachers and our parents right now. So it's important to get everyone to continue to believe in the school's purpose and continue to see value in being a member of the community. We recently had a significant challenge when the government decided to not allow schools to continue to teach online. And at a time like that, we found parents questioning, saying, should we continue with the school if we're not going to be able to have our children benefit from the education that the school should be providing? But it was the communication that we had, and the open communication that we had with the parents, making them understand the importance of our role as an educational institution and our role as a community, and how we are all there to support our children in their learning and development. And that's something that helped all of us stay together as a community and continue to rally past the initial challenges that we saw when COVID first struck. The other aspect that the other speakers had also talked upon is open communication, and I will also add to that advocacy. It's important for all stakeholders to receive the communication in a timely manner, and also to be as transparent as possible. It helps parents to feel assured. It helps children and teachers to feel assured. It helps them feel comfortable in knowing that the necessary measures that need to be taken are being taken to address the challenges and to protect the interests of the community. And I think this helps to build understanding, and it helps to build confidence and trust in the leadership. So this is something that I feel is extremely key, and this is something I would even urge schools to continue doing, not only during a crisis, but even when we function in a regular school scenario, when we're back into regular school. I think the other aspect of helping the community feel included, helping them feel empowered, helping them feel confident and supported, understanding the needs of the community during the crisis. For example, at this point, when COVID first struck, all of us moved immediately online, but the entire focus shifted from curriculum to focusing primarily on the emotional, mental, and social well-being, and then bringing in the aspect of the curriculum that we needed to. And it's important for us as leaders to be able to pivot and to be able to shift these priorities during a crisis to ensure that we still continue to support our stakeholders to the best of our ability. The other aspect in terms of giving stakeholders a voice and hearing their perspectives, a lot of the speakers mentioned, pick up the phone, talk to different stakeholders. And I will reiterate, talk to every stakeholder. Hear the opinions of every stakeholder, at least give them a platform or a voice to feel that they've been heard, they've been valued. And that is going to mean a lot in helping them feel reassured. The other aspect is going to be the realigning of systems and processes and practices to ensure that everyone feels a sense of security. In a crisis, when people feel uncertain, that's when they start to panic. So trying to give them a sense of surety, a sense of confidence is extremely important. The other aspect that I will share, and the third point I'll share, is during a crisis, it's but natural to have either a fight or flight instinct where you're looking out for one's own survival. And in that context, you may look to choose to take decisions that are in your own personal best interest, or you may reach out to people and look for support. And it's at times like this as organizations and as leaders that we could experience significant hardship. And we saw schools go through this during the COVID time and are still going through this right now, is if you've not focused on building a strong sense of culture and community within the school, you will have the school community push back and question the decisions of the school, push back and question the practices of the school. So it's extremely important for us to recognize that while we all may be in the same storm, we may not all be in the same boat. So showing true empathy and reaching out to authentically support all our various stakeholders is extremely critical. So be it a support staff member, or be it a parent who worked for an airline and has had a layoff and does not have an income coming in, it's important to understand everyone's personal context and what they're going through and how best you can support them. So showing true empathy to reach out authentically to support the various stakeholders within the community has, for us, only garnered more support, has garnered more trust, and furthered the goodwill that we have with our parent community. The fourth point I would like to share is to collaborate and distribute the leadership. As I mentioned earlier, the leader cannot be the person planning ahead as well as looking into the core work of the operations and being involved at a micro level. The leader has to focus on distributing the leadership to ensure that our children continue to remain supported, families, support staff, teachers, all have the support they need to be able to overcome the anxiety that they're feeling or the uncertainties they're feeling in being able to continue feeling a sense of normalcy. And I think it's important to have a team that handles the operations of the core work of the school, as well as having a team that is planning ahead. So when COVID first struck, we had people started to immediately look at how do we transition online. Now that we've transitioned online, people need to be thinking about maybe a year ahead and saying, what happens if this continues into the next academic year? And having plans to say, what are the possible what ifs? That's something that I think is important. So having a sense on current operations, but also future planning is key. One thing that I personally experienced over this COVID time that was a significant benefit, we had schools from across different curricula, from across city, from across the country, come together to share best practices, to support one another, and to build networks. So as a school, while you may have smaller microcosms within your community, as a school, you're also a microcosm within a larger context of the education sector. So being able to reach out and build those networks and share practices, in turn, come back to help you support your community overcome the crises. With regards to that, one opportunity that I would like to share is COVID has presented a great opportunity right now for schools that have not been intentional in looking at their culture. The opportunity to transform and shift the school culture. It's a great time for schools to see what aspect of your school culture currently is working for you and will continue to work for you in a post-COVID context. And what aspects of it do you want to intentionally address at this point to help overcome these challenges, to then bring your community together and continue to work towards achieving your school's mission and vision. So with that, I would like to conclude. Thank you, Kausar.
Thank you so much for the entire the way you have actually put the steps for us. And yes, you were right in that one statement that we are all in the same storm, but not in the same boat. And each one of us will have a way in which we are going to handle crisis with our own teams. Towards the end of this session, and as I hear these wise words from all my school leaders on this webinar, I have suddenly started feeling so positive about this crisis. And I'm thinking, let's not waste this crisis. When we are into it and when we are into a problem, let's get some learning out of it. So can I have one statement from each one of you which you feel is the strongest lesson that this crisis has taught us? So let's not waste the crisis, and let's get to know what we have learned from this crisis from all of you. Starting with Mr. Madhav Rao. Sir, can you share one learning which we have strongly learned during crisis? Sir, you're mute. I can't hear you. Yes,
Parents
sir.
are into classrooms. They
Parents
now
are
know actually into classrooms through just online teaching. They know what is the quality of teachers, what is the quality of teaching, what is the abilities of teachers, how savvy they are with technologies, how bad they are with it. And
so you say that one of
and tomorrow in schools when they reopen, the environment is going to be much, much different than what you think today is.
So it, do you
and
agree
all
that
these
continuous
answers we
professional
are doing
development?
wonderfully well online is actually 100% not true. If you see a lot of discontentment in the way that the lessons are transacted in some cases. So all these things will, when they come into school, they're going to be much more critical about what we do, right? That's why it's important now we think that how do we prevent and take transformation to the next level in our schools. A lot of investment in technology has to come. And somebody was asking, nobody's talking about private schools. I've seen some screenshot, right? Private schools are going to be more challenged, right? With the current environment. There are lots of people who price education policy. I have
to emphasize that this crisis has given continuous professional development opportunity. It was every day that we were looking at ourselves and thinking, where did we go wrong and how do we make ourselves better?
Unfortunately, it was not with the digital literacy.
So it was not out of our own interest.
They have used what they got. They had the platforms to use.
This crisis has certainly given us reflection time.
Yeah. For me, they've actually used it effectively and efficiently. As Ashok said, they really worked hard to do that. Right?
Yes, yes.
But tomorrow your school is not going to be different. Everybody downloads the same thing and shows. You have to add dimensions to your, what happens in your classrooms. That's the learning. That's what you need to work for transformation.
And that's a huge learning. That's right, sir. Thank you for sharing your thought on this. And you are right. One of the biggest learning that we have got from this time is that we had to be prepared to keep all the schools ready for technology, not just the corporate or private schools that we talk about. We were not ready with technology in place and continuous professional development for teachers. So we'll certainly say, I was thinking probably we'll have another set of actors or better teachers, better performers after these webinars.
Actually this 10 minutes of webinar is not good enough to actually speak about
so much about crisis. You're
I
right.
think it's a course by itself. One gets into that.
So can we have this lesson learned from crisis from Francis?
So I think it never gets over. We always think that we have solved something. It is never solved, in my view. The impact we always see from a very, from our eyes. You never see the impact from others' eye. So when we talk about online teaching, we will, in years to come, we'll see whether this has helped or didn't help. So when I attend sessions with private schools and when I attend sessions with government schools, I realize the problem is so different, right? So if we think we have solved and we have finished our learning, it has not. We have actually not even understood the problem. That's
So so you are leaving us with this thought that it's not over and the learning has to go on. Even from this crisis, we can't close the book.
And we don't know the impact yet.
You're right.
Even if we are successfully teaching through technology, wait for maybe 2 years. The ASER report or Pratham report will probably open up and say how much damage it has created.
That's right. That's right. So can we have this lesson learned from crisis from Ashok Pandey, sir? Sir, are you there on?
Yes, sir, please unmute.
First lesson, mute and unmute.
Francis.
Mute and unmute.
Actually, I was muted by what Francis said. So So
Well
I
said.
think, this crisis, Kausar, has made us more candid, more confessional, and more compassionate. So as leaders, we really know what are our vulnerabilities. We have realized that we stand nowhere if we do not have a very strong, committed, dedicated team around us. And I have always said it, this crisis has exposed it further. And therefore, the lesson out of it is, whether learning, loss, whatever, that is a different thing. Lesson of this crisis for a leader: please invest in your people. Get invested in them all the time, right? Add value to them and value the people around it. I think that will take you out of the crisis, and probably the crisis will be managed by somebody else. That's what my personal lesson is.
That's right, Ashok Pandey, sir. We have never actually taken the professional development for teachers this seriously till the time we got into this crisis. And yes, they needed a lot of empowerment from us, and they needed a lot of support from us, not just in terms of their technical knowledge, but also in terms of their mental well-being. And it is being talked about and thought about is something that I would say is certainly a positive impact of this crisis. So can we hear it from Vernon? What is your takeaway from this crisis? That one thing that you learned from crisis? And
I would say that I love Said's comment about
we
we're
can't
all in
hear
the
you,
same
Vernon.
form.
Can you be a little louder?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I would say I love the quote of, we're all in the same storm, but we're in different boats. And I would also say I would follow that up with surrounding yourself with a leadership team so that you have people who is willing to row that boat as hard as you are. And that is built during good times, not looking to them just during difficult times.
That's another perspective. So this is how it's going to be in crisis, and we've just proved it through this webinar that we are going to learn and merge and come out with a better plan. And with this, Saad, can you share your positive learning from this crisis?
I agree with all the panelists, and what I would add from a school context is we've always been inundated with messages coming our way talking about the pace of change and how quick change is going to be upon us. And if we don't continue to invest in our faculty and we don't invest in our practices, we're not going to remain progressive as schools to be able to provide our children with the education they need for the world that they're going to live in ahead in the next 50, 60, 80 years. So I would say the importance of a school at this point to understand that it needs to remain agile and have a culture within its school that transcends being stoic or being very rigid and fixed in its approach. Right now, it kind of feels like we're trying to fly a plane as it's being built. So that's the pace at which change is upon us. And I think we need to keep that context in mind, just preparing for change and being agile.
That's right, Saad. So with me, I would also add my learning that I got from this crisis. I have seen a sudden transition, from where Bloom's taxonomy has taken a backseat, and Maslow's hierarchy of needs was more important than Bloom's taxonomy. All of us were talking about safety, security, the basic needs, and then we are talking about content knowledge that we get. And something that we always talked about is what we all were concentrating during these crises, that education is not to earn your living, but education is to help you make your life. And that's what we all came to during this crisis. Education was much beyond the content teaching, but it was more about keeping children connected with their teachers, being connected with each other. And I would proudly say that we as education community have won during this crisis. We have never given up, and not just these webinars, but all through I have seen all the teachers working hard or the leaders working hard. and we are all geared up to reboot and restart again, as Pandey sir rightly said. So when I consolidate this entire webinar, I understand that when you handle crisis, the most important crux of handling a crisis is the leader himself. And then you go to his team and then creating a plan and how he communicates his plan with all the stakeholders, and then comes to reflection with reflection at proper stages and rebooting yourself when required. So with this, I consolidate this session, and I would admit that today's session has given us a lot of hope, ways and means in which we can process crisis. We can process crisis to create a roadmap for self-development, for the development of the organization that we serve, and also for community on a bigger scale. So let's not waste this crisis, and let's be prepared, prepare ourselves for crisis management as well, help others as a community. With this, I hand it over to Bhavin Shah, the CEO of Education World, whom we refer to as captain of this ship, who will take up the QA session with the panelists.
We've overshooted time, but I want to make it very quick. And you started with being a captain. When 2020 started, I wrote the New Year wishes saying, you know, this is a year of 2020, and we are gearing up for IPL. And being on the cricket side, let me tell you, 2020 is full of crisis. You don't know what the next ball and how the player is going to deal with it, right? So effectively, to me, with the crisis of COVID and the challenges that are coming ahead, effectively, each and every leader, I think so, first should be a team player. They have to be amongst the team, because you don't know what's the next step going to be, or whether you're going to be having a bouncer, or whether you have to really going to have a googly. So Francis rightly mentioned, you don't know what's next, the impact going to be. So with this, I have very quick three questions that I want to like to ask panel, and particularly on the domain of education and what the crisis we are facing. Francis, my question to you here is, and we have been seeing a lot of these chats that I'm trying to consolidate, particularly in education, we have the macro crisis, which are from the policymakers, and then you have your internal management crisis. When it comes to the macro crisis, how do you think we can manage as an individual leader, or do you think there are methods to handle this macro crisis?
I think building an environment of listening to perspectives is very, very critical. I've always realized that that kind of culture is so critical when it comes to policymakers, where you are heard in the true sense. You're heard, not just you're speaking. So I think it takes time. I think especially, for example, when the NEP talks about public-spirited, quote, public-spirited private schools, that shows a perspective, right? I think probably because they have not experienced what is a private school. So I think building that culture takes time, and I think it's never easy, right, over the time. And I think once you do that, and once you're heard correctly, I think it becomes easier to actually get close to the situation and collaborate to actually solve it. I've had real scenarios where I could build those perspectives when it comes to online learning. Also, you know, Maharashtra initially introduced certain restrictions, but later on it was withdrawn. I mean, that is because our perspectives were understood. If the government was adamant, then the court, we'll have to wait for the court to decide and all those stuff. So sometimes listening to perspectives, that's a true leadership in my view.
So, and what I hear is also that always make yourself heard, or you have to talk about it. You have to raise your hand as a good student in a classroom. Always raise your hand and answer.
I always say that you can always start singing their song till the time they hear your song.
Saad, I have a question for you. Coming from what Francis have been, do you see that there could be? See, we have seen in the current scenario, with a lot of macro factors coming in, we've been hearing institutes incorporating designations like chief legal officer. You have a chief safety officer, which is going to be coming. Do you see that there would be a chief crisis officer coming in?
I honestly don't see a chief crisis officer, because that is the role of the leadership team that handles it. And it is a collective responsibility. And having a good team beside you, I think schools will be able to handle it. Organizations will be able to handle it. We've handled it for centuries and decades. So organizations will have challenges, but I think it's foolish to think that one person is going to do it.
So it's a collective. So Dr. Pandey, a principal's role, is it really you see a principal being the crisis manager, or you need to have a professional who's going to be as a crisis manager, or you have to appoint a professional for it?
You see, the principal's responsibility will remain the same. Let me tell you, you appoint anybody in a school, every buck will come and stop at the principal's door, right? Yes. Now, how principal builds the team and how that distributed leadership takes the distributed levels of crises, right? So one crisis can be, sorted out by a class teacher in the classroom, and one crisis can be solved by a coordinator or head department. So I think the buck will stop at principal only in the given circumstances. So let us, I'm not a principal anymore, but I can always guide my fellow principals that please do not expect that you will be out of the crisis management situation, but build a team and train your team, delegate your powers. I think that will help the situation.
Fair point. But sir, or maybe let me then have Mason in this question. Mason, what happens is if there are, unlike a principal and in largely a scenario where you are largely dealing with the academics and the ongoing of the day-to-day affair of the institution, don't you think that a management expertise comes through a different experience rather than the academic experience, and the crisis, that the dynamic crisis that we are having as of now needs a different treatment?
I think it boils down to resources. I don't think most schools would have the resources it would take to bring someone with a skill set strong enough to handle a crisis. So I think the real answer there is becoming the leaders, learning to handle crisis themselves, and then reaching out to others, building a peer network of school leaders of who to lean on, and professional organizations would in my world would really be the answer.
Okay, thank you. And last word or comment from Mr. Rao. Sir, you did mention that this kind of session for 10 minutes, 1 hour may not suffice what we are discussing. It's really a good subject and a topic. How far you see there is a receptiveness for the academician to get on a regular professional development? We don't have, we have not had any degree in India where you have with MBA with education, and you have, unlike professional degrees and the multinationals and the corporates which goes through this a regular churn of workshops and professional training for crisis management. Do you think it's the right time now that Indian academicians should be getting on some kind of a degree like this?
First of all, we leaders also have to believe that our decisions are limited by our cognitive abilities too. This is fundamental to build teams, fundamental to do anything, to build teams within the school or to get people. Always, schools should have a kind of a think tank where you have a collective wisdom that comes together to help in management of the crisis. That must be believed, that it is a team which is intelligent team that can help schools to find solutions, right? And second thing is, in the digital space, I'll come to your question. In the digital space, the problem is we need a creative team. Every teacher is not creative. You need to get teachers creative together to help and give a new direction and new dimension to transactions in the classrooms. Digital literacy has to be actually worked upon and improved. And leaders, I tried this experiment to have an aspiring leadership program with IIT Delhi at one point of time. And we found the response from the teachers who want to be leaders was much less. Subsequently, we did also leadership programs with the principals. The principals only come to a kind of conference where they have enough time than to sit for an intense learning experience. You see, first of all, we need to be prepared. Mentally, we should be ready. We are learners. We need to learn. Our learning is to continue. What we have learned, what we have worked for us yesterday is not going to work tomorrow. We need to share with people and learn from them. In that sense, we need at least some short focused programs for principals. Believe all the principals are not metro based. There are principals who are from rural areas, there are principals in tier 2, 3 towns. They don't have opportunities even to learn in that sense. So I believe that the courses that if somebody conducts concentrated courses for principals, that would be very useful, and principals should be willing to join and learn and hone their schools far better, much better than.
So it's a fair point that principals have to learn, relearn, and get this professional. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm very pleased that all the leaders who are here, in fact, 3 of them whom we have already have them on our 25 leaders front cover. They are with us, and more leaders. I'm happy to have them featured in our publication. So thank you very much. Learn2Lead.
Bhavin, not only that you're amazing, you make others feel amazing too about themselves.
So that's the T20 game, sir. That's the T20 game. There is an excitement at every ball. Thank you very much. And over to you,
leadership lesson.
I'd like to thank all of you for being here. Fantastic, as usual, inspiring. And we've gotten a lot of points from all of you. And the other major stakeholder in this entire crisis we've seen right now has been the parents. And that's exactly what our next webinar focuses on getting the parents on board, working hand in hand with them, educating them. And that's when we have our national and international speakers again. And that's the next webinar we're having on the 7th at 5 p.m. I would love, we all would love for all of you to also have a peep of that and let us know what you think about it. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here and all the valid points that you've made. And
thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Kausar. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.